Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you happen to find yourself. My name is Carmen Mazzara, and I serve as Executive Director of APSIA, the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. I'm the one that fills your inbox, hopefully with good stuff for your students. Otherwise, I apologize. We're so delighted to welcome you to another one of our webinars as part of both the Public and International Service PISA Advisor Network and our ongoing support under the auspices of APSIA's Diversity Forum. Today, we have the amazing and lovely and talented Jeff Carey from the Boren program here to share with you a little bit more about that opportunity for your students. He has a brief presentation and then we'll turn the floor over, but I know in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll make sure that we get you all the best information you need to share this opportunity with your students. And so, Jeff, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Carmen. I'm always happy to work with APSIA. I am a beneficiary of an APSIA school and the way that they approach study and preparation for professions, specifically in the international affairs space. I was an undergraduate studying Arabic, but I never heard about the Boren Awards. And so I'm glad that I get to talk to some of you who are trying to help your students bridge this undergraduate experience into the graduate experience at these APSIA schools. When I finally did hear about the Boren Awards, I was a student at the MSFS program at Georgetown. And once I got there, they heard I was interested in Arabic and they were very encouraging of me to apply for this. But I'm hoping that by telling you about the Boren Awards today, if you're not already familiar with them, that you know of this as one of the many opportunities that you will have to share with those students that are preparing to pursue graduate degrees at APSIA and similar institutions. I think that's basically what I wanted to introduce it with. But the experience was critical to me, not only developing an advanced command of the Arabic language, but also I think to landing a career with the Foreign Service, where I served for a little over 8 years, and my first posting was in Syria. I don't think I would have gotten into the Foreign Service without the proficiency in Arabic that I attained through this program, and I certainly wouldn't have gotten that as my first assignment. So I have APSI to thank for that, and I also have the Boren Awards to thank for putting me on that trajectory. So hopefully the experience that I've just related about myself rings a few bells with you and the students that you've been working with over the years. So please share this with them while they're still undergraduates, while they're looking at things like Pickering and Wrangell and the Peace Corps and Fulbright program, because this is something that they can start doing now while they are still undergraduates. Excuse me. I'm going to go ahead and go through a very quick presentation here. I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. Because I know that all of you have a slightly different perspective based on the roles that you play in your institutions and the type of institution that you're from. So let me very quickly go over what the Boren Awards are. The eligibility requirements are fairly broad. You can see them there. A couple of things that I want to highlight, of course. First, you do have to be a US citizen to apply for this award and receive it, but we have a lot of people who are naturalized citizens of the United States who use this opportunity either to study a new language or a language they've invested time in at the university level, or in some cases to develop an academic understanding of a heritage language. So if you are working with students who have recently naturalized or will soon, this is definitely a program for them as well. Foreign language study is key, must be core to your program, whether you're an undergraduate or a graduate student, and it does need to be in an eligible region of the world. It's easier to say where in the world is not eligible than to list every place that is eligible. The Boren Awards are looking for people to study languages and cultures that are less commonly studied by Americans. So with Boren, we are not going to be sending people to Western Europe or Canada, Australia, or New Zealand, but pretty much the rest of the world is potentially available. Security, safety, and other concerns, of course, taken into account. one thing that's unique about the Boren Awards and differs a bit from, say, Fulbright is that you do need to be still matriculated in a degree program in order to receive this award. So as an undergraduate Boren scholarships applicant, you would still need to be in that undergraduate program in order to receive the award. Graduate students likewise must be matriculated in a degree program, but we do provide an option to people who are applying for graduate school to simultaneously apply for the Boren fellowships. And the reason I've got this highlighted in yellow on this particular slide for this particular audience is that if your students are definitely looking to go to one of the APSIA schools, I think that these universities in particular are going to be more amenable to this idea of arriving on campus and then going straight on Boren. That's probably a little less common. I think most of them would prefer that they start the fall semester with the cohort, but a spring start the following year is something that they can apply for as well. So that's an option that's there. And in certain limited cases, for example, the Johns Hopkins SAIS Nanjing program, which does require Mandarin competency proficiency and also has a lot of instruction in the language, that is actually a graduate degree program that could be funded via Boren. But for the most part, what we're looking to fund is supplemental study. Over on the right-hand side, you can see the maximum award amounts. We have a strong preference for 25 weeks or more overseas. Again, the purpose of this is intensive language study, and longer term tends to mean higher degrees of proficiency. There is an exception to that preference for undergraduate STEM majors. So for those of you who are working with, I don't want to overgeneralize, but perhaps less traditional applicants to the APSIA schools who are studying things like engineering, science. In some cases, we do count things like public health and environmental studies as STEM fields. So they have the option to do a summer-only program. It does still need to be language intensive, and it needs to be at least 8 weeks long, but they can make that application without any penalty to selection. And then graduate students do have the option to apply for some domestic funding before going overseas. And if anybody has any questions about that, I can unpack that a bit later on, but that option exists for them is what I want to say at this point. So what does Boren fund? Well, it can fund a couple of things. The most common type of Boren award is a self-designed or a self-identified program overseas. This can be provided by a U.S. university. This can be provided by a private study abroad organization like IES or Amid East. It can also be provided by an independent overseas language school. So we have a lot of people that will just find a language school in, say, Jordan or Latvia, and they will apply for and receive admission into that directly. They do still need to maintain that matriculation at your school that we talked about before, but we are agnostic about the whole question of, are they getting credit for this? As far as we're concerned, it can be entirely non-credit, because really what this is about is preparation for a future career. So we have preferences for duration abroad, which I've already mentioned. We have preferences for certain countries. This map up here is the 2020 application cycle map. I don't know what this is going to look like for 2021. A few of these countries that are green now may be turned to blue, and I suppose there's an outside chance that others could flip the other way. But what the blue countries mean is that these are countries we really don't think, even COVID permitting, we are going to allow people to go to in the fall of 2022. Sorry, that should say the 2021 application cycle at the bottom there. So if somebody, say, wants to go and study Russian in Russia or Arabic in Egypt, they would need to list a viable, unrestricted alternative where they could go study the language instead, should they be accepted, but not permitted to go to those countries. And with COVID, that sort of thing is probably going to happen more often with countries even that we thought we were going to be able to send people to. So flexibility is nice to have. With most languages, there are at least one or two other viable options. Anyway, it's a little more complicated right now, but the bottom line with overseas study even during COVID, is it's actually going forward. This fall, we're going to be permitting at least 13 countries for overseas study, and we already have some people out in Taiwan and a couple of other places like South Korea. So we are trying to make this happen for as many people as we can. The language should be studied in a country where it can be studied immersively, and the full list of languages can be found on our website. The one that I do want to note in particular, though, is that Spanish is not a preferred language. So you're seeing all these countries highlighted in Latin America. There are some limited opportunities for advanced Spanish study or for the study of Latin American indigenous languages. But for the most part, we're looking for people in Latin America to either study Portuguese in Brazil or Haitian Creole. Again, that's one of those countries where perhaps it's going to turn blue for the next year or two until things stabilize a bit. Finally, we do have a slight preference for certain fields of study, but I won't belabor that. I think most of the students that you're talking to about APSIA programs are going to be in those fields of study. The other type of program that people can fund, besides the self-designed or self-identified ones I mentioned earlier, are what we call our regional flagship language initiatives. We have 4 of these. There's one in Africa called AFLI. There's one in South Asia, specifically India, called SAFLI. There's one in Indonesia called IFLI, and there's one for the Turkish language planned to be in Azerbaijan that is called TURFLI. What's great about all of these programs is that they are credit-bearing from a U.S. institution. So in the case of SAFLI, IFLI, and TURFLI, AFLI is a little more complicated to explain, but in the case of those other 3, the summer domestic program takes place at the University of Wisconsin, and then the fall overseas program takes place in India, Indonesia, or Azerbaijan, but is given credit by the University of Wisconsin. So at the end of all of this, someone can go and request a transcript from the university, and they will get 20 credit hours from the University of Wisconsin in the language. This may or may not necessarily transfer back to their degree, but it certainly will be impressive to anyone who is reviewing their application for a graduate program or for a job with the federal government, for example, that would require some advanced proficiency in these languages. With all of these programs, there's also the option to continue into the spring if they so choose. So with all of these languages, and this is true of our other languages as well, we accept people at the beginner level. But sometimes it can be hard for people who've never studied, say, Arabic or Russian to compete with people who have had prior study of those languages. It's not necessarily going to be the defining factor in our selection, but I know it can be intimidating. For people that are particularly interested in learning a language from scratch, these languages are ones that are very rarely taught at universities in the United States, for the most part, the exception of French. But for languages like Swahili, Hindi, Indonesian, they would get a really good grounding in the language in the United States before they go overseas. And then they would do a fall intensive overseas that would be structured very similar to the critical language scholarship, if you're familiar with that one. French is, as I've said, only available to people with intermediate or advanced proficiency in that language, but this is a really unique opportunity to go and study French in Senegal as opposed to, say, France or Belgium, and to really distinguish a student who's taken 2 or 3 years of French from all of the other students from the United States by adding that Francophone African perspective to their studies. So let me very, very quickly go over the main selection criteria for the Boren Awards, and I will unpack these in much greater detail in the webinars that are posted on our website. There are last year's versions up there currently, but you can go and double check later in past mid-August, and we will start uploading the new information, but most of what's up there right now is valid. So the first thing that we're looking for is an appreciation of the national security or public policy dimensions of the field of study. The reason I highlight public policy is because our essay prompt does ask for people to talk about national security issues, and there is a tendency among people to interpret that phrase national security narrowly. We do not. So you can certainly talk about defense or intelligence matters, but you can also talk about diplomacy, development, trade, scientific cooperation, agriculture, energy, telecommunications, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Pretty much any issue of public policy that touches the United States and another country has a national security implication. Sometimes it requires that the student be a little more creative in making this argument, but I think that this will be well within the wheelhouse of most of the students, again, that are looking at APSIA programs. Students should also have a clear desire to pursue a career with the federal government, and they need to spell this out, short, medium, and long-term steps. Again, this is a place where having that preparation for APSIA and going to an APSIA school is going to help them quite a bit, because that is kind of the mindset that a lot of the academic and career advising is in at those schools. So they should be able to not only address this in detail, but they can put their money where their mouth is, so to speak, by showing that they've done internships with federal government agencies or contractors already. That definitely helps to substantiate the claim that they are interested. And then finally, a serious commitment to language study. While graduate students do have the ability to tack on research and internships alongside language study needs to be a core and ongoing element of their time abroad. And if a graduate student wants to exclusively focus on language study, they can do that. It will not decrease their competitiveness for this program. The application itself is fairly involved, but there's going to be quite a bit of time to work on it. It does require 2 essays. We require 2 letters of recommendation for undergrads and 3 for grad students. We do want to see transcripts for all collegiate level study, but these may be unofficial as long as we can make sense of them. And then we like to see a description of the study abroad program, and or if the graduate student in question is proposing to do research in the country, some sort of letter of overseas affiliation with a host institution. But this does not need to be as involved as it is with some countries on Fulbright, for example. So on the right-hand side there, you can get a sense of what we're looking for in a successful candidate. They're meeting the program design preferences. They've clearly addressed national security and how that connects to their academic interests. They have specific and realistic career goals in the federal government. They've created a program that's going to challenge them from their current level, right? So an advanced speaker of a particular language should not be taking a course that's designed for beginners, or vice versa. Again, demonstrating that commitment at least into the future with language study. Like I said, a lot of these languages people may not have had the opportunity to study previously, but they should at least convince the reviewing committee that they are serious about it moving forward. And then, of course, making sure that they answer all of the questions clearly. Very quickly, just to wrap up, I want to point out that the deadlines are well into the future. The application itself doesn't even open until next month, but there will be plenty of time for students to work on this. Some will start very early. Most of them may not start until much later. The best way to get people to start earlier and to put together a better application is to notify them and their professors, the ones you work with a lot, about this opportunity, because I think most of the students, again, that are looking at APSIA schools are also going to be interested in this, and there's no reason that they need to wait until graduate school to pursue these opportunities. And then, as you can see at the bottom there, there's a window of time in which the award can be applied following that application award year. A little bit of homework for everybody right now while you're sitting there. You can either type that URL at the bottom of the screen there into your browser window, or just lift up your phone and scan the QR code. I want to make sure that everybody is aware of who on your campus has been designated the Boren Awards campus representative. Now, this is mainly a voluntary thing, but these are advisors that are usually experienced working with applicants on this award, and are definitely people you should make aware of having attended this and of your interest in helping them to spread the word. So give our directory a look. If it's not you, please let them know you attended this training, because I think they'll be interested in again, using your communication channels to identify strong applicants. And if it's incorrect, please email us as soon as possible so that we can get it updated so that students know that there's a resource on campus available to them. And then finally, and here's a picture of one of our currently overseas grantees, just to further underline the fact that we do have people overseas right now, even in the midst of weird times. Yes, in fact, it is still an opportunity. But you can always get in touch with us. Boren@iie.org is the email address, and then there is that 1-800 number that we encourage you to use as well. So that's the presentation that I have, but I am happy to dig a lot deeper into any aspects of this program. If you do have any questions, please let me know what university you're from and what role you play there, because it might help me to tailor my answer to your interests. But I'm happy to take as many questions as you have. And thanks again to Carmen and APSIA for arranging this.
Thanks, Jeff. While folks are typing their questions or raising their hands, I think my first question to you is, if a school isn't represented among the campus network that you have, is there advice for the advisors on the line to become one of those campus reps?
Well, if they're not if a school is not represented, if nobody's listed, that does not mean that your students are in any way ineligible for this. Everyone who submits a completed application for this award will be considered. And we do have recipients of this who come from schools that do not have advisors. We, however, would love to have advisors because you are able to do a lot more follow-up with the applicants and to work those on-campus networks. So if you notice either that the person that we have listed is no longer there, or if you get in touch with that person and it sounds like they're not all that interested in continuing to play the role and you would like to, you can just email us at boren@iie.org. Certainly, if you're replacing somebody who's still there, do it with their consent. But we're happy to have either new campus reps or alternate campus reps, additional campus reps, I should say. And for any of you who volunteer to take on the role, we will happily brief you for as long as you would like on the awards, either individually, or you can attend one of the campus representative workshops that we'll be hosting later this summer and into the fall.
Excellent. So no inter-university coups, please, but if you'd like to be a campus rep, you're invited to. Do folks have questions? Feel free to raise your hands or unmute yourselves. You all know how this works after so long. I think, again, while folks are talking, this week is actually APSIA's Diversity Forum, which is a program we put on for students who have typically been excluded from international affairs and are therefore kind of underrepresented in the field. And we've had a number of wonderful Boren alum come through. And they've talked about some of the benefits on the other side of being a Boren, either scholar or fellow. Could you talk about the broader Boren network and some of the things like NCE and other pieces that students can receive?
Yeah, sure. So this award is unique among a lot of the other U.S. government funded awards in that it requires subsequent government service. Now, this is certainly true of things like Pickering and Wrangell and Payne, which are directly related to eventual careers in the foreign services of the State Department and USAID. But we look much more broadly at the federal government and also at contractors to federal government agencies as places where service can occur. I would also like to note a terminological thing, which is service. Sometimes people hear the word service and they think that this is non-remunerated. That is not, in fact, the case. It's just something people in the government like to say about the work that they do, that they are, in public service. But when we say service, we mean paying jobs. Now, internships done post-program can receive partial service credit. But for the most part, people are looking to work in the government after they have completed their subsequent degrees, plural, right? If they're on their way to a PhD after this, we will wait. but eventually the federal government will come and say, hey, what are you doing to obtain work in the federal government? Now, it is not up to the students exclusively. They get a lot of support in this from the National Security Education Program, which sponsors this award. They have an office of people at the Department of Defense, though they work with all different agencies that provide advising services. They flag interesting jobs for Boren alumni, as do we at IIE. And then they also line up exclusive job opportunities, of which there are about 100 per year, that take specific advantage of the language and area studies knowledge that a lot of our alumni have, as well as certain specific competencies, like, say, cybersecurity or financial analysis, but there are many others. Many of you will have attended a presentation from, say, CLS, Fulbright, Gilman, Peace Corps, and all of them will talk about NCE, or non-competitive eligibility, which is also known as Schedule A, and it's a bonus that sort of persists for a year after the program is done. So it will move you to the front of certain lines, not all of them, right? It doesn't really affect the Foreign Service, which has its own intake process and things like that, but it will put a qualified applicant closer to the front of the line for many federal jobs. The thing with those other versions of NCE, though, is that they expire. With Boren, that same non-competitive eligibility, Schedule A, exists until the person has fulfilled the Boren federal service requirements. So that's one terrific advantage of Boren specifically. But additionally, any jobs that are funded by the National Defense Authorization Act, which is basically everything at the Department of Defense, many things in the intelligence community, a lot of contract jobs, et cetera, have an additional further degree of preference for our alumni. And then many other positions that they could potentially find on their own will be eligible as well. Plus, we have a very government-oriented alumni association that's quite active, at least in the DC area. And so people will be able to use that as a source of networking. And that network, as well as the IIE and the National Security Education Program, put on periodic federal hiring fairs, federal employment fairs, that they will also be invited to attend.
That's great. And Jeff rattled off a number of different acronyms, CLS and all of those, and we're happy to translate that too if those are other fellowship programs that your undergrads might be interested in competing for or thinking about as they try to advance their language study.
The Critical Languages Scholarship, let me just mention that very quickly. So CLS, Critical Languages Scholarship, as well as Gilman, which is for study abroad, but also has a language award attached to it, Fulbright. People can receive all of these. There's no reason for them to pick one or the other. In fact, we have people do CLS over the summer and then stay in the same country or go to another country to do Boren in the fall. So if you have a student that's looking at more than one of these, encourage them to look at all of them.
That's great advice. Do you have other insights when an undergrad comes into Casey's office and she's trying to decide who she thinks whether it would be a good idea to steer a particular candidate in Boren's direction? Are there insights you have beyond just the call to public service that you think would help her gauge whether Boren might be a fit?
Well, I think
to pick on you, Casey.
I think applicants come in with a different hook. The three main ones that I see are kind of related to those selection criteria that I talked about before. So the first one is subject matter related. Let's say this person is a public health major and they are particularly interested in, well, now everything's going to be COVID. Maybe this is a bad example. Let's say it's an environmental sciences major and this person is interested in the Amazon, right? That is a person who is going to want to go to Brazil, is going to want to learn more about the Amazon and all of the attendant public policy issues. And so for them, the main attraction is going to be to go to Brazil. But in order to go to Brazil, to thrive in that, and to eventually find a career that takes advantage of that particular skill set, learning Portuguese is really going to set that person apart. And those federal hiring authorities that I mentioned are going to give them an inside track on positions that really value their subject matter expertise. So if they come in and that's the focus, subject matter, you know, sell them on the language, sell them on the careers. If their hook is the government career, they come in and they know they want to go work for the government, and they're trying to find every advantage they can. Of course, point them to all of the other programs and internships that the government offers, like Pickering and Wrangell and Payne, like I mentioned earlier, but also say, hey, this is going to give you competitive advantages when you're applying for those jobs. And also it's going to qualify you for the jobs that have a particular need for language and area studies competencies. So this is how you develop those skills. It's difficult to do it domestically purely. So I would encourage you to do this preparation because it's going to be much harder for you to do later on. And then finally, you've got the people that are hooked into this because of the language. These are people who've either got a heritage interest in the language or they have a, they've been taking the language for a few years academically, or sometimes it's even K-pop. But I wouldn't recommend that they focus on that in their essays. This isn't an exercise in radical honesty. But anyway, if people want to develop those language skills and they want to pursue jobs that are actually going to take advantage of them and are going to give them the opportunity to travel abroad again and to work on policy issues that they might be interested in related to that country, this is again going to be a very good avenue for them. And no matter how hard somebody's studied a language domestically, studying it overseas in an immersive context is going to massively increase their progress towards advanced proficiency and the rate of progress.
And you mentioned here on this slide a serious commitment to language study, but you've also talked about some heritage speakers, or maybe those who are either pivoting or wanting to deepen their understanding. Are there good ways for folks who come with a heritage language to show that it's a serious commitment to study if it's just something they were inherently born with?
Well, so we have a few categories of applicant, broadly speaking, and I'll kind of go through a few of them, right? I mean, the traditional Boren applicant is going to be the person who is on, in my case, I had been studying Arabic for 4 years before I applied for this. So those students are the lowest hanging fruit and should absolutely all be encouraged to pursue this. But in many cases, those are the lucky ones because a lot of the languages that Boren favors are not really opportunities at many other institutions. So the second type of person that you have is the person who has a strong interest in that country for academic reasons, but has not had the opportunity to study the language previously. And so for them, it's all about kind of selling not only their interest in the country moving forward, but also understanding how they're going to continue to invest in that language and area studies knowledge that they start to accrue under Boren as they move through their careers. The third type, I would say, that is similar to the last one are the people who have studied languages before, just not this one. And this probably comes up most often in Latin America, where you have people who have prior study of Spanish, but are not applying for a Spanish award through us because it's frankly pretty hard to get. But they do have a broader interest in Latin American issues, and so they are using their prior study of Spanish as a springboard to learn Portuguese in Brazil or to study an indigenous language of a Latin American country that they are particularly interested in. And then finally, the one type of applicant you brought up, which are heritage speakers of the language. And I would kind of subdivide that group in two. You have the people who have heritage knowledge of the language, but no prior academic study. And so I think having some understanding of and humility that what you understand about the language is incomplete and that there are ways in which you can fill out your academic understanding of it, that comes across very well. And it shows that you're serious about pursuing the language, that you've picked a rigorous program that's going to help you fill in those gaps and get you to that level of advanced professional proficiency. The other type are the kind of a blend of 1 and 4, where they've both had prior study of their language and academic study, or they've had prior study of the language and academic study, but they want to make sort of a sideways move. And then, you know, everything that I just said is generally good advice.
Thank you. That's really helpful. All of those different, like a good foreign service officer, you briefed us very well, Jeff. Well done. I'm curious for our advisors, what sorts of questions do you all get, or what are the things that have tripped you up as you've tried to answer for students that we can draw on Jeff's great expertise to help polish out your answers?
I have a question about the matriculation requirement.
Sure.
So we've had a couple of students at Syracuse University do the Boren as undergrads, and it's the matriculation requirement means that they have to stay for a 5th year, and essentially in order to fit it with their requirements. And so I guess what advice would you have for students who maybe see that reluctantly, or to help students kind of think through that part of the process?
I think it depends on the source of their reluctance.
Mhm.
You know, if it's purely a matter of putting on a cap and gown and walking with their friends, a lot of people will do that on the understanding with their university that the extension of matriculation is mainly bureaucratic to meet our requirements.
Right.
If you know, if the here's the general objection that I get, right, which is that they want to move on to the next thing. They have big plans and they are impatient to get on with them. That could be grad school, that could be a job or an internship. It could just be being able not to call themselves an undergrad anymore. It becomes extremely difficult later in life. Even when you are given, say, language training by the State Department or the CIA or some other agency of the federal government, to really get good at it, to get advanced proficiency in the way that other countries understand advanced proficiency. The bar for Americans is relatively low on that. And really the only way you can get there is by taking this detour. But this detour is well worth their time. They are not going to develop these language skills otherwise, even if they're already, in their opinions, quite advanced, even if they've exhausted the language offerings for that particular language that are available at your institution. This is going to solidify it. It's going to make it a permanent skill that they have, and it's going to put them on the path that they want to be on. And in many cases, it actually, you know, really enhances their trajectory, because they came into the application for Boren going, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. And they came out of it going, I know what I want to do with myself. And it is to be a, you know, financial analyst or a foreign affairs specialist or a development person working on this country. That's something they might not have been able to do without that Boren detour.
That's very helpful. I mean, that's the gist of what my argument is too, but it's good to hear it from someone at IIE say that this is what the source is saying.
Well, you know, I'm saying it mainly from my own experience as a Boren alum. Like I said, I don't think I would have gotten into the Foreign Service without the Arabic boost that I had as a result of doing this program. I certainly wouldn't have gotten posted to Syria. So I'm really lucky to have been able to be on that track, and I don't think without Boren that I necessarily would have been there.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Amy. Other questions that you all face that we can get wonderful answers and you can say, I heard it from the source. Jeff, I again, while my colleagues are thinking, you briefly touched on STEM students, and I know that some of my colleagues on the line do serve that audience among their many undergraduate constituencies. Could you talk a little bit about how STEM candidates maybe distinguish themselves, or some of the challenges you've seen that they face that our advisors could help them smooth out?
I think there are There are a few issues that STEM applicants sometimes have with this program, but none of them are peculiar to the STEM fields. I think if anything, they are underselling the value of what they are studying because they come into this award with the perception that it has to be sort of foreign affairs focused, or that they need to be talking about a specific kind of career. Every now and then we'll see somebody who's got like a computer science major or an engineering major who will come in and write a national security essay that's just a super broad overview of the last 50 years of US relations with X country. And nothing gets conveyed via that essay about what they've actually been focused on academically. The STEM applicants that are really memorable are the ones that get pretty nerdy with their subject and then just make sure to connect that back to US public policy and describe the relevance to the country that they're visiting in some way. But their focus can really be on something very technical, and then they're using this to just kind of round out their knowledge and make themselves competitive for that intersection of whatever STEM field and national security or the federal government. So that's one thing. I really encourage them to drill down and get very narrowly focused on a topic that is of interest to them. And then in the second essay, the one that asks them about that career that they map out, to again not look for positions or not describe positions that aren't really in their wheelhouse. Now, sometimes it is true that a engineering major actually wants to be a foreign service officer. They need to explain why. Because if they just say that they're going to be, everybody wonders why they're not doing anything with their mechanical engineering degree. But it would be much better if they talk about the many positions that exist specifically at the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, the intelligence community, and their contractors, or USAID and its contractors that need a depth of technical know-how. Even within the Foreign Service, there are positions called Foreign Service specialist, that are for IT or for facilities construction or for security. So people who do have a particular subject matter expertise can go into the Foreign Service as specialists, and I think have a better time of it than they would if they went in as generalists and were just asked to like write cables on whatever topic that isn't related to what they studied as undergrads.
Obviously, you live and die or know very well all of the many nuances of the U.S. government. For our advisors who have some knowledge of state and aid, are there resources that you could recommend that would help them help their students know that USAID hires engineers, or that there are facilities folks at state? There's so
Yes.
much to understand. Are there good places that you would recommend folks gain some of that nuance?
There absolutely are resources for that. And give me just a second. I'm going to pull up another browser window here. I will point you to where these resources exist on our website, and then I'll tell you a little bit about how you might find them on campus as well. Just a second. Okay. So you should be able to see my browser window now. So this is the Boren Awards website. Here you have sort of a somebody's just landed here checklist that walks them through all of the different steps that they should take to get their application together. But we have a subpage that is on the essays specifically. And in previous iterations, and this is true for those of you who kind of last interacted with us maybe more than 3 years ago, we didn't have a tremendous amount of guidance on our website about how to tackle these essays. That is no longer the case. We have a whole page that deals with it, and in particular, essay number 2, where we talk about motivation in public service careers, we have this subsection on researching federal careers. Now here it gives some sort of general guidance that I think will be applicable to everybody. But also, I don't want any of you to feel like you need to have subject matter knowledge of the federal government. It's unusual, it's arcane, it is confusing. So if you want people to learn about it, and if you want to learn about it, the best way to do it is via the many websites that the federal government has set up with lay people in mind to sell them on the idea of going to work for the federal government. And here on this chart, not only do you have statistics on where about 4,000 Boren alumni have gone on to work, at least initially in the federal government, you also have links to the careers pages of many of these federal agencies. And so anybody who's interested in them, with just a maybe 30 to 45 minutes of skimming and then an hour or two of review, can find most of the vocabulary that they need to talk about the careers that they're interested in pursuing, and hopefully alongside it find a lot of information related to internships and other opportunities that they can pursue in the nearer term. I was just talking, by the way, to somebody earlier today, an applicant who is going to a school that's near an Air Force base. And I said, have you looked into whether there are internships there? Because if you are interested in working for the federal government, not only is that going to help you substantiate that on the application, it's also potentially going to get you a security clearance, so that later on when you're pursuing those careers, it's going to be that much easier for them to process you in and to hire you. And in the case of a lot of contracting jobs, you need to already have one anyway. So encourage people to take advantage of those internship opportunities that exist before they're even out of school, if they're really serious about pursuing government careers. And then, of course, certain agencies like the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, the State Department have information on specific types of careers. So let me just go to the State Departments real quick. Careers.state.gov. And this may not be what it looks like on your screen. I have kind of a dark mode thing set up, but there's, introductory videos here, but then there's information on the different types of work. So distinguishing the domestic civil service from the worldwide foreign service, and distinguishing a foreign service officer, which is what I was, public diplomacy, from a foreign service specialist, which is someone who would do IT or security for the embassy. They're going to find out a lot of information about this, as well as pathways, programs, fellowships, etc. So one thing that I find a little disappointing sometimes when I'm looking at applications is that, people will say that they really want to be a foreign service officer, but it isn't evident in their essay that they've spent any time reviewing this, I think, very easily digestible information that exists on the State Department's website. So it's true that every agency's got something like this. They might not be as well organized, but anybody who's interested in these careers can get a lot of the information they need to write a convincing essay just by reviewing this list of opportunities.
That is such a wonderful tool. I am going to steal it blatantly, actually. And for folks who visited or folks who haven't, the PISA network website too has a number of different tools and resources we've found on federal hiring, for example, from the Partnership for Public Service and some of the other great groups that we work with. So as students start to unpack this, they're probably going to discover agencies that they've never heard of, but might be a great fit for their interests. I always love watching students' minds explode when you tell them there's 17 different intelligence agencies only, and they just have no idea because they don't make TV shows about
I think it's 18 now because of the Space Force.
Oh, Space Force. Forgot about Space Force. So we have about 10 minutes left. Again, folks, if there's questions that you get from students or particular concerns about students like yours, Jeff is such a wonderful resource. Please share them. Jeff, I got one more for you, sorry. You talked about the two essays, and I saw it outlined a little bit on the site, but could you talk about what application materials are required that students have to submit?
Yeah, so let me just pull the slide back up here. Yeah, so 2 essays, 800 words for the first one, 1,000 for the second one if you're a grad student, or 800 if you're an undergrad. Letters of recommendation, they need to have 3 if they're grad students. Undergrads can have 3, they only have to have 2. There's also an optional additional, what we call language proficiency evaluation. So say a language professor does not need to do both one of those and a traditional letter of recommendation, because there's plenty of text on the the language proficiency evaluation to talk about the candidate if they want. The letters of recommendation, I really encourage people to make them a combination of academic and professional. And what they should all have in common is that they are talking about either the student's fitness for extended overseas study in another culture, right? The inherent difficulty therein, or their suitability for a career with the federal government that they are laying out in their essays. Ideally, both. So they should pick people that are best suited to kind of address those Boren specific questions. And of course, they want to get to them early, get them as excited about their program for language study and their prospects for careers with the federal government as they are, so that the recommenders can help to supplement the assertions that they make in their application and round them out as a candidate in ways that we don't really ask them to in the application itself, because our essays, whatever else they are not really personal statements in the way that many other applications are. So they really do need to be directed at these questions of national security and public service.
Can I pause you right there? One of the cycles we know that students get trapped in is they feel like they have to have the experience to qualify for the experience. Could you talk a little bit about how advisors who maybe encounter a student who never had the ability to study abroad,
right,
or whose family perhaps was very nervous even pre-COVID about them leaving, could be suitable candidates for a Boren?
Well, I'll first say that they are. Boren certainly has no requirement for prior overseas study or prior language study. Those things, when contextualized well, can sometimes help an applicant, but they will never, the absence of them will never disqualify an applicant. And in fact, when people can show analogous understandings of what it is that we're looking for, it really helps to make the case that they should be selected for this novel experience, right? If they show that they have made efforts to communicate across cultures in their own environment, that they have committed themselves to public service, even if it's just in their particular community, that they have done analogous work with NGOs or state and local government or something like that. That's really what helps to convey their seriousness. So I would say that a lot of candidates that are like that end up succeeding in this, but we are definitely looking for people who have resumes that show that they are more than just academically interested in some of these topics, but that they are pursuing opportunities. And for those people who have not had the opportunity to pursue an internship because they are working full time and paying for school and doing other things that require their attention. A lot of applicants, I only find that out about after they've applied and it hasn't been successful and they're asking for feedback. And I say, well, that's something you could have put into these essays. It's much more impressive for somebody who has been working full time to say, and I'm seriously committed to pursuing this career, than someone who has not. And even if the work that they've been doing isn't in any way related, it shows a work ethic that they can really cite. And maybe they don't want to belabor in their own essays, but certainly a recommender could help to round out in their portion of the application.
We often see some of those jobs draw leadership skills and detail management and customer service and all of those things that are so valuable in a public service context too.
Absolutely.
And students forget, they feel like they don't count, and we always try to remind them how much they do. I also want to put a cheap plug in for your students to think about the virtual student federal service. Many of you joined us for our VSFS webinar a few weeks ago, talking a little bit more about that. And if you weren't able to join us, that recording is also on the AppScia YouTube page. So that's another great way from students who want to intern from home and remotely. Right. They're unclassified, but they're a great way to show that call to service.
And I would say that, in the past, there might have been a perception that those weren't as good as other government internships, but I think that their stock has risen thanks to COVID, since most internships are virtual now. But also take advantage of those local opportunities. Not everybody's in DC or New York or wherever, but almost everywhere in the country there are military bases, and the Department of Homeland Security has facilities at airports and ports and border crossings. So there are opportunities nationwide while people are still in school to pursue these. One other person on your campuses that I would encourage you all to reach out to are people who run DC internships. And this is true both for APSIA and for Boren, that a lot of the people that are interested in working for the federal government are going to come from there. They've already got the vocabulary to talk about it. So those are people that should definitely be made aware of the Boren opportunity and the coordinators of those internship programs.
We're always so pleased to work with those folks too. We have just a few minutes left. Any other questions we can answer for you all to help make sure you get this information to your students? All right, well, Jeff shared the Boren email, and I promise they are responsive to that. Sometimes you get a generic email that just goes into a big black hole, but the Boren folks are quite good about that. And we're so glad you could all join us today. And Jeff, thank you so much for sharing this program. And we look forward to seeing some amazing undergrads head your way and then come to APSIA schools and go out and do amazing things in the world with the US government. So thank you all so much. Yes.
One very last thing. You can receive the Boren both as an undergrad and as a grad student. So it's not an either or thing. They can do it now and later.
A double Boren. I like it. Do you get like extra swag at the conferences and stuff?
No, but I mean, there's definitely, I can tell you that at least one of the recipients from an APSIA school, grad school this year, was an undergraduate Boren. So there you go.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much. A recording of this session will also be on the APSIA YouTube page, along with all of the other webinars and content we've done for advisors. So thank you all so much for being here. And I look forward to seeing you at another APSIA webinar for PISA. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.